how I first heard about OurSay, but what excited me about them was that there's been an idea knocking around in journalism for quite a while now called the citizen's agenda. It's probably been articulated best and first by Jay Rosen, who is of course our keynote international speaker, who gave a stunning speech on political journalism at the BMW The Edge last night. The idea is that journalists, rather than being gatekeepers and deciding what the public should hear, should actually use their might and their skill to find out what the public want things like political campaigns and so on to be about. Now this idea, as I say, has been knocking around for at least a decade, probably more, and no major media organisation that I was aware of has picked it up or done anything with it, although everybody seems to think it's a very fine idea. So I was kind of excited when I came across a bunch of people who are not journalists, but who are doing it anyway. And so that's how I got involved with OurSay, and they have since become involved in the new news. One of our key sessions today, which again is down at Federation Square at the Australian Centre for Moving Image, will be holding media leaders to account. And the OurSay website and social media presence has been used to crowdsource questions, which will be put to ABC Managing Director Mark Scott, the CEO of Fairfax, Greg Highwood, and the editor of Crikey, Sophie Black. And the author of the most popular question will join those three media leaders on the panel.
Thank you, Margaret. And I do want to say that, Margaret, huge thanks from OurSay. I mean, although not, an official part of the team, an unofficial whisperer, and one who's actually put us and gotten us to where we are, without a doubt, today. And so we really do want to thank you for that very much. And before we start, we'll just go down the line and just name what you do at OurSay, and then we'll kick off.
My name is Giuliani. I help do all the web-related stuff, and I also help out Eyal with some of the strategic stuff as to where we're going and how we're going to get there and who we're going to meet and who we're going to talk to next.
I'm Matthew Gordon. My role is to hold 3 or 4 alpha types to account, and just to make sure that we do what we say we're going to do, otherwise known as the glue.
My name's Eyal Halamish, and I'm the guy who sits around and lets these guys fight it out for a while before I at the end say, all right, that's where we got to go. And so they call me the guide, or the guy who gets the last vote.
And my name's Gautam, and I basically, I'm not even sure, what do I do? I just tag along with these guys. I work mostly around idea generation and how we're going to take this platform to the next level, and some of the strategy and some the ideas around that.
Right. So what we thought today's session was really a chance for people to ask OurSay questions, and I'll tell you a bit what OurSay is and why today's a bit different than most of the sessions we run, because typically we get people in positions of power to respond to questions that are put up on our website, and we actually put together a session and thought, what are we going to fill this session with? We came up with a cool title, which is Populism versus Power Shift. And we didn't really decide exactly what was going to be the content of that, other than maybe you guys would have some questions for us. But I'll give you a bit of a rundown about what the website's about, and also a couple of key lessons and really our vision and why it is more power shift rather than populism in our eyes. So to give you a bit of insight about OurSay, OurSay is a site that was started in our brains about 2 years ago, but went live about a year ago. And it's a place where you can get onto the website, you write a question, and you can share that question with people on Facebook or Twitter or other social media channels. You can also send it through emails. And if you can generate enough support for your question will get answered by someone in a position of power. So we launched this in August 2010 with the Australian federal election, where we had the top 3 political candidates for the seat of Melbourne responding to the questions on OurSay. And we had, a really interesting story was we had someone named Sam who rocked up to our launch at Readings Bookshop, and Readings Bookshop being one of our sponsors for the platform. And so we launched out of Readings, and this 7-foot British guy rocks up and says, I'm really interested in this OurSay thing. Haven't been in a bookstore since I was 4 years old. When I read the newspaper, I only read the sports section, and the rest of it can pretty much go in the dump. And thought, I want to win this game. So the next day he took his laptop to the gym that he works at, and he put the laptop up and posted a question about caffeinated drinks. Should there be a legalized aid on caffeinated drinks? And started running a campaign behind this question. to the point that his question was #1 on the site, and people were commenting and saying, you know, this is a worthless question, and others saying this is a really important question, and there's a public health issue here, and you know, a big muster around this issue that didn't seem to be a hot political topic at the time. But eventually it did win, and the political candidates had to go and research their positions on this issue and respond to that question. And so we had someone who's completely disengaged from the political process, actually driving an issue that he cared about, and changing the way in which politicians respond to the issues that people care about, and actually having to do research into a whole new space that they hadn't thought of before. Beyond the federal election, we went towards the state election in the seat of Brunswick, and we had the top 3 candidates responding in kind of this, it was almost like a rock opera, if you will. Now, it was more of a... It was more, you know, there was lights, there was camera, there was action, people were cheering and booing for the responses that came from political candidates, and we were able to really change the way that people engage online by taking them offline and getting them to meet each other as in, you know, who are you? Oh, A1 Kid Genius. Oh, Grog's Gamut. Oh, I didn't know that you were so tall. Didn't know you were, you know, really connect with people in their community that, you know, that they only met online. And so from that point on, we struck up a partnership with ABC, and Q&A wanted to fuel a couple questions to their TV station, and so they actually ended up selecting the second most popular question, which was a bit of a point of contention at the time, rather than the most popular question, and they posed it on to a national audience, and people were actually driving questions on the site, which had been a really important issue because they'd been saying the executive producer is controlling the questions that go on the site, so let's let the people set the agenda, the citizens' agenda that Jay Rosen talks about for the site. And Malcolm Fraser came on and responded to questions. We've also worked with Minister Dixon around education and getting schools across Victoria asking questions. The CEO of Telstra, David Thodey, has responded to the top question on OurSay and was actually covered in the Financial Review because the top question was about why are we sending the yellow pages to people's houses, you know, in a physical form when isn't that a form of environmental vandalism? And his scuffled answer was actually captured in the Australian Financial Review as a cartoon saying that he's still speaking to dinosaurs and people who want to receive these clunky things on their doorsteps. And it was quite a fascinating way for someone to get their issue not only responded to by David Thodey, but actually produced across the Australian Financial Review. Most recently, we were currently working with the Sunday Age to power 10 questions, which the Sunday Age is committed to report on over the next couple months. And for those of you who don't know, Andrew Bolt decided to hijack the platform and invite on day 2 all of his followers from the Herald Sun to post questions on OurSay in order to get that onto the Ages, the Sunday Ages paper. And so now we've almost got an audience swapping happening in OurSay where we're creating this psychedelic media cycle where people from the Herald Sun want to read the Sunday Age, and maybe in future we'll have the Herald Sun readers reading, we'll have Herald Sun reading the Sunday Age and Age readers reading the Herald Sun.
And they're all reading OurSay.
And they're all reading OurSay at the same time. And the most interesting thing is that when you get onto the site and you look at the commentary and the debates that are happening on the site, you get a real feel for the range of opinions around climate change right now. And you know, you almost start to really understand. And guys, have, you know, I've seen questions where people get in a bit of a banter, and it gets to a point where they actually get to some form of resolution through the commenting at each other, and they start to actually say, actually, you're not too bad. In fact, maybe we should have a cup of coffee, catch up, you know, knock this out. So that's you know, OurSay to date. Maybe I'll just give 3 key points about where the vision is and where we're trying to head, and why we think it's not necessarily populism, but really about power shift. And so the 3 key trends that we've kind of tapped into or see as really critical in redefining this media space is, one, it's about decentralized media. And it's the fact that we need to take it away from a concentrated, limited perspective to this multiple stage perspective where many people can actually feed into our understanding of an issue. We actually, you know, we start to build these communities, and it's that whole citizen journalism agenda, but to a point where media is coming from many different pockets rather than just from News Corp or Fairfax or, you know, one concentrated source. It actually limits our understanding of issues and prevents us from moving forward. The second major point is really around risk communication and upskilling people across communities to communicate risks better. So how, you know, if we're going to have decentralized forms of media and we're going to embed it in individuals to have to generate this media, they need to be able to communicate risks well. You know, when they see something that's an issue, how do we communicate it in a way that actually allows us to manage that issue rather than get too outraged or freaked out about that issue or not care enough about that issue? Managing how we communicate risk is really critical for us to address those risks and actually overcome them in communities, you know, as a society. Yesterday Jay Rosen talked about Ron Suskind, who's a big risk communication specialist, or we talked to people like Peter Sandman, who are 40 years of psychological and emotional research, saying that we need to get people to understand how do you communicate risk better. And the third major point is around engagement, and not just engaging online and getting as many of you on to OurSay as possible so that we can actually live out this vision, but also to get people who connect online to engage offline, which is a new paradigm that's happening around this online space about how do we actually get geotagging, or people who can understand where is that person tweeting from and how do I connect with them, and are they around the corner, so that we can actually talk about this in person and see each other's facial expressions rather than just guessing as to what this person is talking about. At that, I'll just leave it there and open it up for questions, unless you guys have anything else to add. No? So this is your chance to ask the OurSay dudes any question you'd like. Yes?
I would be a little bit frightened, to be honest, to be in contact with someone, to know where somebody was tweeting if I was tweeting against them. I don't like that whole concept of the geocaching. I would be frightened of that. Do you think that that's something that, I'm sure I'm not alone in my fear of, wanting people to know where I am. Do you think that's something that could stop some of this sort of development of OurSay, or the future of this type of social media?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, and something that with this climate agenda, it's quite a heated debate.
That's right.
We've got a lot of people. We had to moderate our first comment the other day, which was pretty for a year of running. We've never had to moderate a comment or a question, and that was a thing that we'd always say to people. But we had to moderate our first comment, and that was obviously a little bit sad for us.
What did you have to do?
Because we have terms of use, and if anyone breaches those terms of use, we suspend their comment and just take their comment down. And it was an abusive comment, so we had to take it down. And for that was that was the thing, a really thing that we would champion. That we didn't have to moderate a comment or a question on OurSay. But in terms of security, it's interesting because we sometimes do cop a lot of criticism via email of not engaging and not doing things right, or it's a left-wing platform or it's a right-wing platform, or you're setting the agenda when we're completely not setting the agenda. We kind of get all these kind of criticisms. But when we email back and when we tweet back and we say, let's have a beer, let's have a coffee, let's talk about it, or let's have a phone conversation about it, the amount of the criticism just drops immensely, and it's like, actually, I see where you're coming from. And so people on the internet and these negative tweets, we engage with everything, and we always comment back, and we always say, hey, what do we talk about? Let's have a phone conversation, let's have a coffee, let's have a drink. And as soon as we do that, it diffuses their anger. And
I think getting at your point, that personal connection is really, really important. I think the way that the technology plays that out, platform, Facebook and Twitter and even your camera have had geolocation capabilities for a long time now, but we haven't seen many of those platforms roll it out as compulsory, because there is this kind of little bit of a fear of do you actually know where I am? I suppose what Gautam's trying to get at is we're trying to make a connection between people, and if the geographic aspect of that is conducive to that, then we would like to encourage that. And sometimes it is hey, you're actually tweeting me from the back row of the same room. That's wow. We could just talk. And so, yeah, that's silly. So I think in that context, it can actually be quite constructive. But you're right. There is a bit of a balance around privacy versus accessibility and making that connection to each other and other people.
And I think it's an interesting point to continue on, which is this idea that when you take letters to the editor, often you need to, for example, the age requires, who is this person, where do you live, and confirmation of that. But online, anonymity is sort of a new opportunity on this, and trying to work out, is it okay for people to troll these forums without having to give up exactly who they are? And, A1 Kid Genius wins the game. Who exactly is A1 Kid Genius, and what position are they coming from? And so there's this kind of interesting tension, I think, with new media about trying to manage anonymity versus, transparency and legitimacy.
And is that why you then, as a concept of OurSay, when you do have these public events, the person who achieves the winning question, you actually bring up onto the platform? So is that one of your strategies about overcoming the kind of the social media and.
I think there's two bits. One's about the connection between people.
Yeah.
The other one is the empowering of the citizen.
Yeah.
So in this whole, some of the stuff we're talking before about power shift, it's about, in some ways, taking that special place of a journalist away and giving it to a citizen and saying, hey, look, go ask your question to David Thodey. Go ask your question to the guys in the panel this afternoon. That's a really powerful experience for a lot of people. And so we're trying to break down that disconnect, really, I think.
I think a really key point around that is also that in empowering individuals, it's about no longer just liking something or this keyboard activism, if you will. It's actually about getting people to own and take responsibility for the issues that they care about, and that means that you really have to sit there and you're a bit confronted by the needing to ask a question. What question would you ask, and how do you formulate it, and who do you share it with? And just going through that process as a user of OurSay is quite a transformative thing. You get to a point where you're like, I do want to champion this issue and not just tweet it out into the ether and hope someone will see it and maybe convolute it into something else. And that's really important.
And one thing that we're trying to work on too is to build toolkits for citizens. So when a citizen logs on, or anyone, whoever logs on, we actually say, this is how you ask a good question, this is how you run a campaign around your question, this is how you get onto those social media channels, those kind of things as well, which we're currently developing.
We have a question over here. Just in the third row.
I'm a little bit the opposite of the woman that's just spoken. I'm quite technologically phobic, and not because I'm incompetent, but because I have an ideological problem with trying to connect to people through a little screen. And as a result, I'm quite disconnected from a lot of conversations that seem to be going on in the world, because I just go, I want to talk to a person. I'd like to hear a bit more about what strategies you use, like you've said, to try and move that into what I call the real world, which seems to be less and less the real world, I'm discovering. So, I mean, are you at this stage sort of looking at running more forums like this, or like you said, your little rock star performance thing where it actually brings it, can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing in that sense to create that connection?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that we talked about early on was, how do you make this type of engagement real? Like, it's just one thing just to have a sort of a list of ideas online, but how do you actually really drive an outcome? And I think, in terms of driving political outcomes, the process is complex and it's systemic, right? And so it's not going to be about, Twitter's not going to save the world, neither is Facebook. But it's going to, I think, provide a new way to aggregate people online. And so what we've essentially tried to do is, if we can dangle a carrot to sort of say, look, we want to incentivise this game that, if you can garner the most support from your own community around your issue, then, like Kevin Rennie, who's at the back, you'll get to sit up with the media leaders of Australia and hold them to account. But that's not going to happen unless you're rubbing shoulders with them. And it's that ability to aggregate online and then make sure everyone who got involved to come to the show and to, like, for example, the Brunswick forum that we ran in the state election, we had 200 people sort of a bit like us, somewhat disengaged, having a beer, talking politics on a Monday night. This is the sort of building civil society, right? So it's not all about the online. I think that being able to bridge online and offline is critical. But I think you go another step further and to think, well, we can agitate, or we can create a platform in which people can agitate and get their issues across the line. But who's listening and who's watching? Yeah, and the ability for that to become the news story itself. This notion of sort of cyber politics. Citizen A kind of is creating a storm here, and for that to then be reported in the general media. That's also an offline engagement as well, and it's the ability to kind of get that news out. It's new news.
Just to quickly add to that, another thing that we've done is when we start an OurSay, we don't just put the OurSay up and say post a question. We go out and we run community forums or community engagement sessions where we actually get community groups into a room and we say, this is how you use OurSay. And we walk them through the process and we say, this is how you post a question, this is how you vote, basically like the toolkit with us presenting and showing and talking to them and then saying. And so for the Brunswick state election, we had really localised issues because we'd actually gone offline spoken to the community groups, told them how to use it, and got them to prioritise those issues online, and then took it back offline again, and had this, you know, so it was just a tool in the middle to really create this amazing debate online and off.
Yeah. I've got my old man who wants to ask a question.
Thank you.
You might want to just visit the website before
a slight disquiet about OurSay in one sense. My disquiet is based on two issues. One, is it basically organised gossip and opinion? First one.
Journalism that is dead.
And I was interested and influenced by Jay Rosen's talk last night, where he said it's very important to distinguish between opinion and facts. Now, I can imagine a thing like OurSay being hijacked by some extreme group. For example, as Jay Rosen mentioned last night, the Tea Party in America have hijacked a debate with their own facts. Do you see that OurSay may run into that trap of it being a circular, organised gossip medium?
Good question. Yeah. Conflict of interest.
That's an excuse to give me the hard ones. But so I think, I mean, it's a very good point. And I think at this stage, it still is to some degree quite an editorial. It's a lot of editorial comments from a range of people in the community, and that is something that we've thought about. In fact, even Matthew Landauer, who's here from Open Australia, we've spoken to him a few times because he does a lot of that fact provision. He's actually saying, well, here's what people are saying, here's what Hansard says, you know, and here's when the next policy is going to go into place, and here's a planning alert about how you can get involved in the process and actually guiding people towards where the information is, because a lot of it is bound up in these, you know, dusty old books right now. And so being able to link initially, you know, I think the first gap we chose to fill is this one around getting the disengaged just engaged again. And once they're engaged, it's actually about making sure that they've got the information to make more credible, you know, to understand the facts. Also, the point that I made before, which is one that was made by Jay last night, he talked about Ron Suskind. You know, you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts, or something along those lines. And I think that's, you know, that's quite true. You know, that's a very, if you're going to upskill the populace to think about how they communicate risks or how they communicate facts, they need to have the skills to know, you know, when something needs to be told and needs to be brought to the fore, and when something is actually outrageous and isn't true and needs to be brought down to a point where it can be reasonably, you know, assessed. One of the, you know, I work in the field of risk communication, and we talk about risk being a factor of hazard and outrage. So risk is a factor of technical risks, so the real risks, and outrage, which is the perceived risks, you know, the way in which people look at the hazards. And both can cause risk. You know, if people are really, really pissed off about something, that can cause just as much risk as if the thing's actually going to hurt you. But sometimes we get more outraged about something than the real hazard can cause. And so getting people to understand that and know, actually, the Tea Party is generating their own facts here, and they're getting highly outraged about things that aren't real. We need the populace to be able to understand that and analyze that and bring that down to a point where we can have a civil conversation about the real facts.
And what's your mechanism for that?
So I think that's, you know, part of that. As you get people, social media is actually quite, it's, you know, it's under the premise of risk communication, in the sense that people are out there communicating things about their lives or things that they see all the time, and they're doing it in a very accountable fashion, they're doing it very transparently, they're doing it in a very engaging way, which are all pillars of risk communication. And so the more people get engaged in this space, the more they actually learn about how to sift and winnow through information to find the ultimate truths that, you know, that sit behind them. And so that is about getting people more and more engaged in the social media space, but also for them, you know, some of it is actually building institutions that train communities like we do offline, and actually going and teaching them about, you want to actually generate, you know, post things that are, you know, facts, and you want to generate things to real truth, and well concise and well presented issues will resonate in the public forum, you know, in OurSay.
Can I, sorry, just before I go to my brother-in-law.
Fair.
Finally, that's the last question.
I also want to sort of talk a little bit about, like you mentioned, the notion of gossip, you know, the circle of gossip, and well, that's what journalism and media always was before, you know, the Gutenberg press. You know, it was sort of, you know, the Chinese whispers, you know, the coffee house, right? So but I think when journalism started getting organised in a printed fashion, and all of a sudden became a broadcast mechanism and not a gossip mechanism, through the publication of newspapers, to find a sense of truth in that medium, objectivity became the pillar. And so journalists would report from a place where they believed essentially in nothing, because they just reported what's in front of them. This side comment, that's what's happening. And people like Murdoch pick up on this, with Fox, and they go, well, there's a market for subjectivity in journalism, and right-wing subjectivity. Let's have a strong opinion as journalists, and it gets ratings and makes a lot of money.
It's like a bolt.
It's like the bolt thing, with, the bolt from the blue, where he stacks out our site, and you can sort of see the top question is miles ahead because it had Bolt's endorsement. But the thing that social media brings and the internet brings is this a new pillar, moving away from objectivity, is transparency. As long as we know where people are coming from and what their position is and what their potential conflicts are, then that's okay, because I think the consumer is always going to be savvy to sort of see through that.
I'm not sure that it is actually okay. This comparison you make with the coffee house, that was fine in the 18th century, but now it's feasible to access the opinions of 6 billion people.
Yep.
And that gives a completely different dimension to gossip. I mean, you can have all sorts of extreme views now appearing popular.
That's true.
Well, I think there's an assumption of rationality which really scares me. Because, if I look at that assumption in the fact that, science is declining in terms of its ability to influence behaviour. And my concern is, if I look at what happened with the Bolt thing, how do you deal with the fact that actually when the population is wrong and actually has the ability to influence politics, what do you see as a role of the organisation in that sense?
Well, I think like this idea, the politicians are sort of, driven by the polls that come out every 2 weeks on, these really narrow, loaded questions, and so, their public policy and their public politics is not really coming from anywhere but the opinions of the masses, right? My view is let's compete with that, and poll every day, all the time, everywhere, on every issue.
My question is how though, Matthew, because if you're competing with them and it's the same voice that is driving the politicians, then you really, you haven't moved anyone towards rational discussion of facts or rational modes of behaviour.
It's definitely something we've been talking about, is how do we tie in fact with this whole stuff. And I think we're starting to get there with the project with The Age a little bit. So part of the commitment on reporting, at least from our point of view, is let's try and find 10 top issues. And some of the questions will overlap and they'll essentially be about the same issue. And then Michael Bachelard's going to go and do the research on those things, right? And come back and report about those things. Now, I'm optimistic that a lot of that will be fact. But at the end of the day, it's still written by a person. So there's still going to be some opinion in there. And so the cynicist in me says, but you're still just getting a journalist to do it anyway. I think for an organisation of 4, it's somewhere to start. Tying in fact with the issues that are here is definitely something we really want to work on. And to be honest, we don't know the best way to do it yet, because if we did, then we'd be doing it. So, but can we just go to another question? I think there's
you said at the very beginning, one of the principles was it's not about popularism. How does this sit when you've actually got a Facebook system that says, yeah, I agree, and you've got, and Matthew, you just talked about it's okay as long as we know about transparency. We're offline at the moment, so we're hearing about this stacking that just happened. The online community, I can't see the transparency is actually there. How does that sit?
Yeah, I think there is, to some degree, it's currently developed in a way that it does involve, more of a popular movement, and it actually is geared. The only thing that somehow displaces that is the fact that you get 7 votes and people allocate those votes in different ways, and it actually starts to be more of a preferred selection.
Do they, or do they just go to their friends?
Yeah. No, they do.
They
so
actually
we've
do,
actually done a whole lot of statistical stuff about how people use their votes. And so about 1/3 of users will put all their votes into one question. And then the other votes are actually quite distributed 2 here, 2 there, 1, 1, 1. I wish I could bring up the pie chart that shows the distribution. But there is actually a pretty good distribution of votes, and it was something we were really curious about at the start. And we spent like months arguing whether people got 1 vote or 10 votes or 50 votes, or the amount of time we wasted on that question is fine. But you know, it's actually really interesting. And so people coming into, and then we can look at how that affects individual questions. So for example, the Bolt supported question here, most of the votes to that are 7-vote users. And that's obvious, right? Because Andrew Bolt said to his supporters and followers and readers, hey, go support this question. Most of the people will come to the site, have a poke around, see the question they're trying to find, and go vote, 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 vote. And so it's a unique dynamic about that question. And it kind of comes back to that information thing. Well, okay, lots of people care about this, right? So if lots of people care about this, regardless of their opinion, let's go find the fact about it, you know, and then maybe we can have a conversation about that issue in a fact-based, you know, system. I think it's still coming out, like a lot of those statistics about how the forums get used. The other thing that I just want to note is that different forums get used quite differently. So the Age one has been more of the 7 votes to a question kind of situation. Some of the earlier ones, there were very few questions that got all 7 of the users' votes. And generally it was the person asking the question. We've actually even found a lot of people will only put 1 vote on their own question and spread their other votes to other people's questions because they think they're valuable too. So this kind of 7-vote system, it's got a bit of a life of its own. It's actually been really interesting to watch it evolve. I think we're hoping to do some statistical analysis and make it public after the Age one to see how that actually works. I think that starts to go towards your stuff about transparency, about this is actually how the votes worked out. These are the graphs of how they grew and all that kind of thing.
Because I think there's another interesting thing, which is Batch is now going to report on not only the question, but you know, the sort of the story behind the question. You know, and that's a sort of a way of kind of going, well, you know, here's how online works, and you know, here's the pulling power of Bolt. Actually, you know, you got the Sunday Age, and we're getting more traffic from Herald Sun. You know, it's crazy. So I think what we want to do is be able to get the data and bring it to the front. So you're automatically generating these sort of interesting visuals, I guess. I think Craig Butt described it as data journalism. You know, being able to sort of tell a story through data.
The big trend, and it was spoken yesterday at the Innovation in Journalism, that there's a couple of people presenting, and they talk about this trend around gamification. And that's something that as more and more people get involved in this site, so tell all your friends, the more and more people get involved in this site, the greater case we have for getting greater gamification, which means that people start to get more currency on the site, you know, so not just 7 votes, but now you get incentivized and rewards for the different things and activities that you do on the site to want to learn more and further engage in this space. So it's not just about populism, but it's actually about you as in, you know, owning issues and actually being incentivized to further investigate those issues yourself.
Just to add to that, the thing I love about OurSay is that it always proves me wrong every single time, right? So in this situation with the Andrew Bolt thing, I thought, well, this is it for us. Like, you know, it's stacked out. It's all going to be climate skeptics on there, and the questions are going to be bad. And everyone's going to cop a lot of criticism. And I'm like, come on, OurSay, prove me wrong. And it has, because if you look at the questions and you look at the votes that have happened on the site, we've had this big spike, Andrew Bolt, and then it's gone back to normal again. And now we're seeing issues, personalised issues, and like issues that around climate change that haven't been brought up in the mainstream media, like this one on animal agriculture and effects on climate change, starting to come up, and you're trying to see these skeptic questions fall down, and you're trying to see other issues like nuclear energy or the effects of nuclear energy come up, and so we're trying to see a really diverse view of opinions. And so in relation to that hijacking by Andrew Bolt, I think it does that, but eventually it drops off after all their users have used their 7 votes and they can't vote anymore, and then we start seeing all the other issues kind of come up, and that's what the benefit of having a long period of time, because you know it kind of dies off, and the other people, the individuals get on and they can start running campaigns again around their issues. So having a longer, lengthy, and around about a month, allows it for a diverse views on the platform.
We've had over 500 questions posted on this particular
forum. Yeah, we'll take another question maybe.
I think, was there?
Yeah, I did. It's kind of been answered, but I guess we've talked about transparency a lot. How do you guys deal as an organisation with your own transparency?
Probably not very well at the moment. To be honest. Is that transparent enough?
I think Matt's right, and I think the poor excuse is that we're small. and so we don't really know how to do that in some ways.
Yeah, I guess getting that trust is going to be really important too.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. And in some of the early OurSays, that was why we didn't rely on, you know, Facebook and Twitter and our friends and all that kind of thing, but we're running, you know, engagement programs with the public. And so going out, you know, for the Brunswick one, going out and meeting the people who might be interested in these areas and talking to them face to face and saying, hey, you're interested in this, you're in this electorate, here's a forum in which you can start talking to people, and this is who we are. This is how we're running things. And so I think there's kind of two parts. There's the transparency of the platform and the transparency of the team.
Yeah.
And the transparency of the platform is about how does it work.
So with that moderated comment you guys put up, that you've moderated it and why?
Yes, so if you go to that user's account now, it will say account suspended, please see the terms and conditions. And if you look at the terms, it says quite clearly hateful commentary is going to be moderated. At the end of the day, there is some subjectivity in that, and you know, we're kind of learning how that works. Like Gautam says, I mean, it's kind of the first time we've had to do it, and it makes me a bit sad, to be honest. But you know, we're gonna follow through with that and be open about how we went about that process, why we did it, the terms under which we'll do it. So it was very, very important for us that the site had clear terms before we launched, before we did anything, and that it was absolutely transparent as to under what conditions certain actions would be taken. And I think that goes to the transparency of the platform. Transparency of the team, we could probably do a bit better. There's some information on the site about who we are and kind of where we've come from. But I think you're probably right. I think there probably does need to be a little bit more of that kind of stuff. And part of that is this. Right? We're real people. We're sitting here talking to you about the site and the project.
This is our transparency. We'll take a question at the back.
Yes, have you caught anybody trying to cheat yet? I've got some views on how you could do it. I didn't. But my manipulation was different. Unlike some of the questions up there that are about 1,000 words long, I had a one-liner so that people who wanted to vote for me could find my question. This time it's the short, bland one. Because it's not, I didn't want to ask a question on notice. Get on the panel and ask one they haven't heard before. But it seems to me that people couldn't cheat.
I think asking a good question is a really important skill if you want to get it up the top. I'm really surprised that the second question on the Sunday Age forum is so long. I have a short attention span, and you know, on the internet, people generally have a short attention span. You know, a bit of a rule of thumb is people's IQ drops by about 20 points as soon as they sit in front of a browser. You know, and so to get through a block of text like that is a fairly phenomenal effort that has gotten so many votes. And I think asking a short question, super great way to get your idea out there and get people to vote it. I can read that in a second. Hey, that's a good question. I'll put a vote on that. So I don't know that I would put it under the category of cheating. I'd put it under the category of smart question asking. I think your broader question about cheating is, I mean, we monitor the site. We're trying to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. Where it does, we're trying to adhere really closely to our terms and how those kinds of things work. You know, at one stage we had some duplicate account making, and we had to be really clear about how we dealt with that as well. But I think we're trying to be really honest to our terms and really honest to what the platform's about, and really honest when people ask us why something has happened. So there are clear contact details on the site as to what, you know, if someone's unhappy with what's happened, get in touch with us. We want to talk to you. We'll go for a beer. We'll go for a coffee. We'll talk about what happened and how you might be able to re-engage with the site and what's going on. You know, re-ask your question, but don't call someone an idiot while you're doing it. You know, so there are ways to do it, and I think people in general are amenable to understanding those kinds of things. Like Gautam was saying, most people we speak to, you know, they've called someone a big liar or something like that. You ring up saying, hey, well, why have you gone down this path? Oh, because I felt really blah, blah about this and that and the other. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's figure out how we can get you re-engaged with the site instead of just saying, well, you barfed it, so go away, we don't want you on the site anyway, and you don't belong in a democratic society. You know, because that's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to re-engage people who are disengaged with this system.
And if you've got ideas, let us know. And in the front, you had a question?
And my question is this: how do you decide who's an appropriate expert to answer the question? I mean, given that some of these will be politicians, so first of all, why will they answer the question? You know, they don't just say, "What the hell? I don't need to answer that question." Or if there is expertise involved, how do you decide who is the expert, or which range of experts should answer the question?
Good question.
I think.
Do you want to pick that one up?
Just a quick clarification on the site. The decision makers are chosen before the forum goes up.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you ask a question, you already know who you're asking the question of.
Yeah.
So the Australian Media Leaders Forum, when it went up, it said these three, and fourth person, these are the people answering your question. Ask whatever question you like to these 4 people. We think that the topic of that is about Australian media leaders. For the Age one, we think that the topic here is about the climate agenda. So I just thought, I'm not sure whether that kind of partially answers your question.
Yeah, no, I didn't. How are these people selected?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We fundamentally manage 2 risks. We manage, the risks of the community, that this is a platform that's got integrity and independence and it's going to deliver you the outcome that you expect. And the other risk that we manage is the risk of the political decision maker. How do I know the top question is going to be okay? You want me to commit to what? The most popular question from the public, like this could go anywhere. What's your favourite colour? I don't want to be wasting my time with that. So, in terms of who we choose, I mean, when we first started, we were chasing Lindsay Tanner in the seat of Melbourne. This was before he announced his resignation, and to set up the first OurSay forum, recognising that Lindsay Tanner was the Minister of Finance and Deregulation, which had the responsibility of overseeing the Government 2.0 task force, exploring government's use of publicly disseminating data, and we thought that's great, and he's got a lot to say about the media space as well, and he seemed like a suitable candidate. But to kind of manage his risks, through his media advisor was quite challenging. Then we realised it was actually because he was retiring. And we were talking about this challenge on 774, and Kath Botel, who went to replace him, was sort of laying in bed listening to this interview going, holy crap, I think I have to be on this platform now, and so that sort of, I guess, gave us the opportunity to have a go for the first time. But we sort of, last year we started with the federal and state elections, so it was kind of obvious to choose political candidates in seats where we thought there'd be some interesting dynamics. Typically the broad left, get onto this earlier than the right. So the Greens jumped onto it, Labor jumped onto it very easily in terms of political decision makers. A lot harder to convince a Liberal to do it, in those seats in particular. But since then, honestly, our program has sort of snowballed, and we've had opportunities connecting with people like Meg and New News to sort of say, well, hey, we've got this opportunity to get these leaders on, do you want to plug in? And we sort of say, yeah, we think that's pretty...
Can I just add to that in terms of the Australian media leaders? When we were putting this conference together, I went trawling my contact book basically, looking for media leaders who would agree to do it. Mark Scott answered very easily and quickly. Greg Highwood also reasonably fast. We approached Chris Mitchell, the editor-in-chief of The Australian. Took 3 weeks and eventually said no, which left us very close to the deadline for the Melbourne Writers Festival programme. Invited Simon Crystal, the editor of the Herald Sun. Unfortunately, he was willing to do it, but couldn't do it on Saturday. He had an existing family commitment. We then invited the Herald Sun to nominate anybody they wished to represent the News Limited part of media, and they came back to us and said there was nobody available. So to some extent, it's a question of who will participate. So that's why these people are there, because we wanted them, but also they were willing.
I think we've also seen a transition from us going out and actively seeking people to partake, with people coming to us and saying, hey, that's a really good way of doing engagement with the person I work with. So people, it really has been this transformation of, hey, can we use your platform to facilitate this communication? And we're really happy about that, because we want this to be an open platform and for the engagement to be the key thing, So I'm not sure over the next, couple of years about how much we'll be seeking out platforms and how much we'll just be responding to them. But I think that's an interesting shift that's happened.
Just to add to that, if you have an issue that you want to get up or an issue that you want to run an OurSay on, email us and let's have a chat, let's have a coffee, because we're always interested to hear what people want on the agenda, and that's what this is this is about, getting you guys to set the agenda, and we want to facilitate that. So tweet us.
I think Eyal's got something to say about getting decision makers addicted to the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I did. Just trying to keep the answers short so we get more questions. But I think it is really about trying. We're moving to a point where we want to get people in positions of power, decision makers, addicted to this platform, so that they can actually see where pockets of interest around certain issues are coming from, so that they can actually see value in wanting to be all actively involved and in real time responding to questions. And so that's the next wave of really ensuring that people, just as much as there's a bunch of users that we've been building the platform for, which is the public, but there's also a whole set of users that we haven't really built the platform for, which is those who are responding to the questions. The only time that they really engage with the platform is when they have to respond, and it's typically a shock and horror, and then go for it. So they, and so it needs to be something where they're far more comfortable with this, because as we started off, that understanding of how do we communicate with each other and how do we engage with each other needs to be a learned and an active practice. Maybe we'll take another question.
Is that me? Yeah. I live and work in a rural and regional area. I report on agricultural issues. And I wondered if you've done anything to engage people that live out in the regional areas, because to me it looks like a platform they can get on, because once you're online you're there, but they wouldn't be engaged with something that they don't feel like they have a voice in the voting and stuff. So just wondered if you've done anything on that to try and engage those people in rural areas.
You're going to help us do that, yeah. I think it's something where we did actually run a forum called linked with Quarterly Essay. Did you want to speak about Quarterly Essay?
No, just got it up. Yeah.
Oh, you just got it up there.
Oh, yeah.
So we did do a forum which talked about the city-country divide, and it was in partnership with Readings and the Quarterly Essay group. And so there was we had a panelist, including Margaret Simons, responding to people's questions around this issue. And we did do some engagement of sending out emails to people in rural parts of Victoria and even Australia, trying to engage with farmers' federations and people in those parts to get them involved. It is quite, when you're based in Melbourne, it is quite challenging to get out there, which is why we're trying to do other things. But another example, we're currently developing a project with the Victorian EPA, and one of the great values that they see in using this and trying to engage around their enforcement across the state is that it allows them to engage those in the rural parts of Victoria without having to spend a whole lot of cash getting out into those communities to understand where they're coming from. And so, but the more help we can get in rural parts and people wanting to help support this in rural parts, the better.
We would love to run community workshops on OurSay and teach people in rural communities how to use this thing. We'd love a media partner, so if you're interested, get in touch after this session. We'd love to do something in the rural communities.
I think one of the things that I get really excited about, like the internet in general, is that it's not geographically bound, and I think it is really one of its most powerful things. So I think, not to kind of say we're already doing it because it's on the internet and that's enough. Obviously, that's not enough, but I think that's a pretty good start, right? So, and just to echo what Gautam's saying, we want to get out there, But I mean, I grew up in Melbourne, and I love it. But I still acknowledge that we need to move out into those areas. I have no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of thing that we're looking to do. In line with looking to be more transparent and looking to have more transparency about who gets on the platform and things like that. Definitely stuff we want to be doing.
Up the back there.
Just to follow up on that, what do you know about the demographic of your users in terms of age, income, and location?
That's a good question.
According to our Facebook page, we have more women than men using the site, and around 20 to 32-year-olds, I think, was demographic.
Yeah, so
you got to be a bit careful about Facebook demographics, because so you can sign up to the site using Facebook and using a regular old boring kind of username and password login. And so obviously the Facebook stats are going to be skewed towards people with Facebook accounts, thus Facebook demographic. Yeah. And that's part of the reason that we didn't say only with Facebook. We said you can have normal accounts too. The account thing is kind of a requirement so that we have accountability about who's voting on what and stuff like that, which is a real problem. To answer your question directly, not a whole lot. in your bio page, we decided to go against asking people to fill in their date of birth and their sex and all those kinds of things when they first registered, just as a barrier to entry thing. There's definitely a big range. We know, what's our oldest question?
84.
84, and our youngest one is what, 12, something like that. So we've got a pretty good age range.
That's still in the extremes, but you've got to think about where's the medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And
particularly in terms of income level, like if you're a lower income earner in the outer suburbs, are you taking the time? Do you know it exists? Are you getting a voice there? Or I mean, I'm part of the left-leaning inner circle in the city of Melbourne, so it's great for me. But is that really in a big range of questions?
One thing that we have been doing, we did this last year, is we worked with the Humanitarian Crisis Hub and some local NGOs where we actually went and ran online training, not even about OurSay, but how to use online tools for their advocacy purposes. And we sat down with a range of community groups, mostly refugee groups living in diaspora in Australia, and we sat down. We taught them how to make blogs, and we showed them OurSay as part of that, and taught them how to basically advocate for their causes online. But also, we would love to do more of that, but we're like 4 volunteers who all have full-time jobs and do this between 6 to 4 a.m. each night, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. each night. So if anyone's got any money that they're willing to throw it our way,
which is always selling,
always selling. But tweet us.
Can I just add also, I think you're right. It's one of the things I've always been challenged by is, are we just creating another platform for the usual suspects? You know, we're stealing them from Crikey, the Drum, and whoever else, and you know, is it just us really? You know, our users are a reflection of us. You know, sort of inner urban lefty types. I'm a swinging voter, however. But,
I'm American.
So it's a sort of challenge, I think, is, you know, how do you get out into the suburbs, and how do you get people sort of in with that sort of way of life addicted to it as well. I'm pretty sure that, you know, we've got a strong following age between 16 and 34, and then 55-year-old plus, because we know what that sort of mid-range are doing. They're paying off houses and sending kids to school. So it's a sort of a challenging place for them to engage anyhow. Perhaps tools like this might bridge that digital divide, as it were.
I'm leading with what you just said, in transparency and all that sort of stuff. What's behind the platform? How's it financed?
Yeah.
By us and an angel investor, Nick Francis, gave us some cash up start to build the platform. Readings Bookstore sponsored us initially as well to get us moving.
Is there a model about sustainability?
Yeah. I think so.
I haven't slept for about 4 months. That's our sustainability model.
Are you wanting us to buy you coffee?
Yeah. Please feed us.
That's how it works,
As you leave,
maybe a cup of soup as well.
A hat, so please donate $5 for a hat. We're going to eat tonight.
So I think that there is an interest in sustainability. That's actually what our backgrounds are in, is how do we build sustainable systems and structures, and that's where we're from. And there's 3 streams of revenue that we're looking at and that we're actively testing. One is around sponsorships. So do we go and get more sponsorships and other companies to get a banner ad at the bottom of the site so that they can endorse it but not directly influence what's happening on the site, which was a great Google philosophy that we would be tapping into. The other thing is around selling the service or providing it as a product, if you will. So with the Sunday Age, for example, that was a commercial agreement where they said, we see value in this service for our readers, or for actually growing our user base. So they paid us to use that, and if we can sell that service to people while growing the social outcome, which is getting the public engaged in this type of activity, that's a worthwhile cause, and we're willing to do those types of commercial agreements. The final one is really comes from this gamification space, so where people talk about the games for change space, where you build online games that deliver a social outcome, and they build virtual products or things that people can purchase that make them better users on the site. In some on Facebook, you see things where you can buy people gifts, and you get an icon for that gift. Similar things where we was brainstorming and thinking of what are the virtual products that we can develop that deliver a greater social outcome on the OurSay site. And I think that's where the real, if we can get to that phase, that would be the real sustainability model if we can get it right.
I'd be interested in how you guys perceive your positioning vis-a-vis, say, an organisation like GetUp. And is there any interplay, or do you see any interplay between the two?
Yeah, when ABC Q&A, the OurSay the OurSay video came up, and someone tweeted out, someone at GetUp just lost their job, So, and it's a funny thing because people do say, oh, young people, politically active, this must be another, political lobby that's trying to get a progressive agenda up in Australia. Online. And so we see GetUp as an activist group. In fact, we hope an activist group like GetUp would use a tool such as OurSay. They should be one of the users. They should be going up against Andrew Bolt. In fact, when Andrew Bolt put that question up, GetUp put a post on their Facebook page saying, hey, can you guys get on and vote for some of these other climate change questions rather than the one that Andrew Bolt just endorsed. And so I think there's a clear differentiation between an activist group and a social utility, a tool that we provide for the public. We got 5 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions.
So, how do you see yourself differentiating from online opinion polling companies who use much more scientific techniques in terms of establishing a balanced responding group and don't allow loaded questions and have, allow things like in your first question there are misleading facts and people say, I agree with the question rather than that's a good question, I'd like the answer to it. There are all those areas where people who are paying for correct information, like government bodies or sort of political parties do, they're all the things that online opinion poll companies try and filter out so that they get meaningful results. So how are you going to compete against that?
Yeah, the initial development of this was on the basis of engagement, so the purpose is to really get people to own the issues they care about and engage with people who make decisions about those issues. The polling kind of, we're like, oh, actually we're polling, that was almost, an afterthought, if you will. But I recognize that, and I think it's a very important point. As it evolves, it is about building greater sophistication around the polling, and to some degree we are pulling together online polling and vox pops and, talkback radio at the same time, and it's this mashup that makes it more fun than online polling. It also ensures you that you get a response from someone who's going to be making decisions about that issues rather than just here's what the public think. Now a decision maker gets to choose whether or not they want to respond to that or how they want to frame that online poll to their benefit.
But you may find people who are willing to invest in engagement and education and sort of the gamification stuff to show people more about an issue. But to get people to actually value the information and pay for the information, it has to be correct and accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think hopefully, that's OurSay 2.0 is a kind of, we can start building that capability and build in those sort of statistical models to make sure we can actually get some meaningful polling results and report that publicly. But I imagine until we get a volume of traffic and we get some data analysts in the team, to really sort of crunch that and try and work out what the errors are and all that sort of stuff. Then, but perhaps that's potentially a revenue source as well in the future.
I think there's also a bit of a distinction to be made on our platform specifically about the asking and the evidence. We've tried quite hard to not present, the top couple of questions as fact. They're questions. They're meant to be presented in that way of a person's opinion / question. The fact stuff that we were talking about earlier about, well, how do we discern the fact from these questions and then present that back and use it as a citizen education tool in some ways, then I think that's kind of the other end of that process. And I think maybe the Sunday Age project is quite a good example of how we're starting to try and head there. So we've got these 10 questions. We're not trying to say that that's the fact or that's what's going on, but we're still going to answer those questions because people think it's important. And so let's try and discern the fact behind it and then present that back to those people.
Sorry.
Yeah, we probably should wrap up because we've run out of time. But we want to thank you and everyone for the wonderful questions, and I hope we've answered them. we're 1 year into the game, so we're not experts by any means necessary. We're just kind of going out for the experiment. But we really do appreciate all the questions and for listening to us speak for the last bit. If you do want to see OurSay live and in the action, it will be happening at 2:30 today at Acme. Make sure you buy a ticket if you haven't got one yet. And we want to thank the New News Conference and Margaret, and is anyone else on?
Craig Buss as well.
Craig Butt,
and Fiona.
Wheeler Centre, and Fiona. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And if you want to chat to us, get after the session,
Yeah.
get
Buy us a coffee.
OurSay.org.
Thank you.